The pilot of How I Met Your Mother is the best pilot ever made, and I will explain this, but I want this video to be the same length as the pilot, and a lot happens in the first 5 minutes, so I kind of have to get going. The year 2030, from the offset, we know that this is about 25 years in the future from the current day, and the kids are teenagers born roughly 10 years from the future. This is going to be a long story. Ted introduces the show's framing device, where the show is going, and the kids' interaction with Ted introduces the tone of the show. The framing device allows for direct exposition to the audience. In the first 30 seconds or so, we already know Ted's age, occupation, the stage of his career that he's in, where he lives, and who his best friend is, Marshall. It starts with Marshall practicing his proposal to Lily, who is another of Ted's best friends. And despite Ted's voiceover saying that Marshall is screwing up Ted's life, he is excited for them. He walks through how well their proposal is going to go, before pleading Marshall to not have sex on their kitchen floor. This characterises Ted as uptight and Marshall as more slobbish, as well as introducing that they're roommates. Marshall thanks Ted for his help, and Ted responds to this by expressing how much Lily and Marshall's relationship means to him, saying, "Are you kidding? It's you and Lily." Showing us the strength and bonds between Ted and Marshall's friends, and showing Ted to be caring and supportive and Marshall as sincere. Ted reminds Marshall, as well as informing the audience, that he's been involved in their relationship from the beginning, showing how close Ted and Marshall are as friends, and, well, how long they've been friends for. Transition from that to Ted asking Barney to go out, and that contrasts Marshall's settled life and relationship with Ted's still single and uncertain love life. We're introduced to Barney's character very quickly. Hey, you know how I've always had a thing for half Asian girls? From this one sentence, Barney is characterised as a misogynistic womanizer, and from the background around him, having a nice shave at a barber's, he clearly has a decent amount of money. Ted and Barney's relationship is also characterised, with Ted having no issue with Barney's misogyny and making no comments about it. Ted may not reciprocate, but he at least puts up with it, and he asks Barney to go with him to their regular bar. And Barney agrees, asking Ted to suit up, giving him one of his many catchphrases. And as Ted doesn't reciprocate in suiting up, this earns Barney a decent amount of pity from the audience, endearing him as a creep with a heart of gold. And their relationship is clearly very one-sided. Barney has a lot more enthusiasm for their relationship than Ted does, as Ted regards Marshall as his best friend. And this is demonstrated when Ted pushes Barney's complaints about him not suiting up aside to talk about Marshall. Barney is half-heartedly upset, but Ted ignores this to continue talking about his fears about his relationship with Marshall. Ted is worried that by Marshall and Lily getting married, that he will be left behind, failing to find a relationship of his own. Barney, in his own way, supports Ted, telling him not to worry about it until he's at least 30. From here we find out how Barney and Ted became friends. They met at a urinal, and Barney has latched himself onto Ted from then, showing that their relationship has been very one-sided since its inception. In this flashback, we also see how Barney tries to impart wisdom onto Ted, despite being an unwanted motivating factor in their relationship, but he still wishes to be the cool mentor figure to Ted. After the flashback, Ted rationalises his fears about his relationship with Marshall, saying that when your best friend gets married, you start thinking about that stuff. After Ted says that Marshall's his best friend, Barney makes him say that he's his best friend, and this shows how insecure Barney is about their relationship. After this, Barney tries to get Ted's mind off things by finding him a girl to talk to, and he plays Have You Met Ted? Back to the apartment, Lily's coming back from work and we find out that she's a kindergarten teacher. Marshall is cooking and Lily is excited but also concerned because last time he burnt his eyebrows off. And Marshall says that he's full of surprises today, trying to foreshadow the later proposal, but all that does is make Lily want to find out sooner. This characterises Lily's eagerness, as well as allowing future Ted to introduce how Marshall is going to law school as a way of setting up that he's quick on his feet. Being quick on his feet, Marshall makes Lily jump, saying that that's the last surprise, hoping that she'll stop asking. Back to Ted still having a crisis about his future, talking to this person he just met about his relationship with Marshall. He talks about his marriage plans, showing his nervous, overthinking personality. He stops his downward spiral by making a self-deprecating joke, which the girl finds endearing, but this makes Ted think that she's drunk. and suggests that she gets more drunk, presumably so he can sleep with her. Back to the apartment, Lily has taken over cooking, as she clearly doesn't trust Marshall to do it. Marshall gets out some champagne, but he's afraid to open the champagne cork and tries to pass it off to Lily, who says that he's being childish. As Marshall proposes to Lily, they compare the proposal with Ted asking the girl out by literally putting the shots on top of each other. And while Lily's so excited, she jumps at Marshall and they fall onto the floor. Ted gets rejected, and we find out that the girl is Carl the bartender's girlfriend. Alright, so the next 5 minutes there's a lot less going on, so I've got a bit of time to explain myself, but before I do I need to fob you off to masterclass to explain the point of a pilot. The pilot episode of a potential series must achieve several objectives, some having to do with the production side, and others with the experience of the story or for the viewing audience. These jobs include introducing the world in terms of screenwriting. The pilot episode must present the world, main characters, setting and themes to the viewing audience. In many ways, the pilot episode provides a blueprint for the rest of the series, setting up questions and situations that evolve as the show progresses. Provide a test run for a series. The pilot episode allows the network to determine if the show would work financially, and often serves as the first episode of a series. Serve as a backdoor pilot. Showrunners and producers create a backdoor pilot when they want to center a storyline around supporting characters, in hopes of creating a spin-off. The success of these pilots shows the network that the supporting characters can carry a television series separate from the original show. Only one of these is really relevant to what we're here for, as all pilots that become a full series are as successful as each other for that, and How I Met Your Mother can't be a backdoor pilot because it's not a spin-off of anything. So a good pilot introduces the show's world, characters, setting, themes, and provides a roadmap for what future stories would come. And as much of this as possible would be introduced in an episode's first act, as that acts as a story's introduction. So the first act of the pilot introduces the world, Ted's life from his future perspective, 4 out of our 5 main characters, the setting, New York in 2005, Ted's apartment, the bar, as well as the themes, love, relationship, friendships, and longing. Also, we know where the story is going. We will meet the mother. We don't know what type of stories will happen yet, but of course that's going to come in the rest of the episode. And the only major thing we have to learn yet is who our final main character is going to be. And like the pilot, I'm going to get to that a bit later. What sets this pilot apart is the amount of ground that it covers. How I Met Your Mother's pilot is about how Ted and his life changes so that he can meet the mother. And it begins with his realization that as Marshall is getting married, he is also ready to get married. The pilot has to set up where Ted's story begins from, where he is in his life, his career, who his friends are, and what perspectives he has. And it has to do that with not just enough depth to set up the rest of the pilot, but also a several 100 episode long TV show. And it's almost done that. All it has to do now is walk the walk. It has to show the type of story that all of this will generate, so that we can see how Ted might meet the mother later down the line in the show. Back to Lily and Marshall, who have had sex on the kitchen floor, and Marshall hits Lily in the eye with the champagne cork, justifying their previous hesitation. Meanwhile, Ted is overwhelmed by the pressure of getting married. Ted says that he's ready to get married, but he just can't find that person. And at that exact moment, he looks across the room to find someone who he falls in love with at first sight. He points her out to Barney, who says, "Oh yeah, you just know she likes it dirty, go say hi." And while Ted wants to take his time in approaching her and come up with some elaborate plan, Barney just plays "Have you met Ted?" Quickly back to Lily and Marshall, who are getting a taxi to go to the hospital, and then right back to Ted, who's talking to the girl who we find out is a news reporter, and is also out with friends, one of which just got dumped. Ted offers to let the girl throw a drink in his face if it will make her friend feel better, and she quickly accepts. Ted asks her out for the weekend, but she's got to go to Orlando because she's covering a story about a guy who's making and eating the world's largest pancake. From there, he suggests that they go out the next day, and she accepts. So the girl gives him her number, she throws the drink in his face, and she goes back to her friends. And Barney comes over to mock Ted, But Ted reveals that he'd not only got her number, but also a date for the next night, which makes Barney disappointed because they'd planned to go laser tag the next day, but Ted never really planned on going. Now, on the date, the still unnamed woman points out a blue French horn on the wall, which Ted calls a Smurf penis. Future Ted tells his son not to say things like Smurf penis on a first date, but regardless, the woman still finds it funny. Lily and Marshall are back from the hospital, and Lily has an eye patch on, which she finds incredibly annoying, taking off almost immediately. Ted walks in to tell them about their date, and goes over all the pedantic ways that they're perfect for each other, including their olive superstition. Lily loves olives while Marshall hates them, and this balance makes them the perfect couple. And as Ted loves olives and the girl hates olives, that makes them perfect for each other. Ted mentions this on the date, and the girl offers him some olives that she's got in her apartment. So the last 5 minutes after the intro covers Ted finding a love interest, as well as continuing the B story where they go to the hospital after Marshall hits Lily in the eye with a cork. So in the A story, we find out Ted's process for finding a woman, hopefully, to fall in love with. He finds a woman. The place is sort of irrelevant, but it's usually the bar because that's where he hangs out. And after finding a woman, he talks to her with Barney's assistance, and he takes her on a date within a few days, along with some awkward jokes. And this is contrasted with Lily and Marshall's relationship, which is strongly tested by Marshall hitting Lily in the eye with a cork, but it might not seem so with how calmly they deal with it. But many couples in early stages of relationships, where Ted would want to end up, might break up over this sort of thing. In a weaker relationship, Lily would be completely furious with Marshall for his carelessness. But she doesn't, and she's more frustrated with the eye patch than Marshall. And this shows the audience the strength in their relationship. Meanwhile, Ted's date is good, but is still very uncertain. This date acts as the fun and games section of How I Met Your Mother's pilot, as in Save the Cat. This is the genre fulfilling section, where Ted is actively looking for someone to fall in love with. But although Ted clearly has strong feelings for her, he has not secured a second date yet. The girl had intended to let Ted up to her apartment, but she's pulled away for a story about a guy trying to jump over the Manhattan Bridge. And Lily says that that's the moment that Ted should have tried to kiss her, but Ted refuses her advice because she doesn't know what she's talking about because she's not been single since the first week of college, which tells us the length of Lily and Marshall's relationship, as well as the length of Marshall and Ted's relationship because Ted's been around for the whole time. From that, Lily says that even the dumbest person in the world would agree with her, and that Ted should call him. Ted calls Barney, who's playing laser tag. Ted asks for Barney's advice, and they go to meet at the bar. Barney asks Ted to suit up, but of course he doesn't. Ted says that he couldn't have kissed her because she didn't give any sort of signal, but Barney says that this is ridiculous, and kisses Marshall to prove it. Ted gives in, and he says they'll kiss her when she comes back from Orlando, but Barney says that she would have forgotten about him by then. They see her on the news, and after they find out that the guy on the Manhattan Bridge didn't jump, Ted is inspired to go out and kiss her. Marshall suggests that as it's a bit late, it might be a bit stupid, and uses his future law degree as proof that he's right, but Ted still ignores him. Ted goes to leave and they all go with him, but Barney says that he'll only join them if Ted suits up, which for once he does. And that causes Barney to exclaim that he's going to put that in his blog. On the way to the girl's apartment, Ted steals the blue French horn from earlier. They arrive outside, Ted pumps himself up, and Barney makes a sex joke. Ted buzzes the door but is scared off by the 5 dogs that he forgot she had, but she calls him up anyway. As Ted leaves, Barney asks Ranjit, the cab driver, about his sex life, and then Lily says, "Okay, that's my Barney limit," and she goes to find a bathroom. As Ted is outside the cab, we find out how his friends interact without him. Lily doesn't really see Barney as a friend and can only stand him for so long. Marshall likes Barney more and treats him a very similar way to how Ted does. But unlike Ted, as he's in a relationship, he can't really participate. So while the first half of the first act shows how Ted finds a woman, the second half of the second act shows the role that Ted's friends have in this process, how they support him and give him advice. And so while the first half of the first act is the fun and games section, this is the dark night of the soul of the second act. When Ted reveals how the date ended, Lily calls him stupid immediately. She wants what's best for Ted and is willing to call him out when needed. Lily is the most confrontational with Ted and is the most willing to give advice. And this advice does lead Ted to go back to the woman. Barney has a very similar approach, but it comes from a very different perspective. At the bar, Barney agrees with Lily, but has a lot more practical advice. Ted wants to wait to kiss her later, but Barney, with his somewhat misogynistic advice that it is, says that he should do it sooner rather than later. Lily does agree with Barney, but the why behind it is very different. Barney says that he should go to it immediately, not just because of his experience with women, but because he likes short-term gratification, while Lily agrees because she's impulsive and open to taking risks. And this is contrasted with Marshall, who gives a lot more grounded support. So while Lily and Barney convince Ted to go, Marshall thinks it's kind of a bad idea. This characterises Marshall as being far more risk-averse and concerned with Ted's heartache later, rather than some sort of chance at love. And this doesn't just develop the characters, it also introduces the differences between them and sets up the conflict between Lily and Marshall that later pays up with San Francisco. For Ted, Marshall acts as the angel on his shoulder and Barney acts as the devil. Barney wants him to run wild and Marshall restrains him, while Lily acts as a kind of medium between them. She does agree with Barney on this instance, but for very different reasons. And as she's in a relationship with Marshall, they clearly have the capacity to agree with each other. This is how you do efficient writing. You hit as many birds with the same stone as possible. In this scene we find out how Ted's friends interact with his love life, giving him advice, the dynamics between them as advice givers, the lenses through all of them give advice, and the differences between them that can lead to conflict later down the line. This hasn't just developed the characters and their relationships, it's also set up future stories later with the conflicts that they introduce. In the apartment, the woman asks why Ted's in a suit, and he nervously says that he's there for the olives. She suggests they have a drink and puts on some music. Back in the cab, Barney confronts Marshall about some olives that he saw him eat before, because famously Marshall hates olives and Lily loves them. But Marshall admits that he only says that he hates olives because Lily asked for his on their first date. Barney uses this as an excuse to tell Marshall that he shouldn't get married because he thinks marriage is stupid. In the apartment, Ted and the girl are slow dancing, and Ted accidentally lets slip that he's in love with her, and this freaks her out, as well as shocking everyone Ted's telling the story to in 2005 and 2030. And back in the cab, Barney's still talking about olives. Barney suggests that Marshall's hunger for olives represents his hunger for new experiences, and that Marshall's scared of new experiences. And Marshall says that while he is scared, he's not scared of marriage. He's not scared of marriage with Lily, as Lily comes back. He admits to Lily that he likes olives, and she doesn't care. Ted avoids the subject of being in love with her by talking about Florida, but she's still freaked out and Ted agrees to leave. She gives Ted the olives she promised before, and Ted says that he's in love with her again. Barney's getting bored of waiting, but Lily wants to stay in case Ted needs their support. But she gives in after Barney starts talking about how Ted might be having sex currently. As the woman shows Ted out, Ted tries to do some damage control. As he leaves, Ted gives a speech about how he hates being single, how he's ready for marriage, and how he thinks he'd be great at being married, not the single part. They share a long, lingering handshake, which everyone, including Ranjit, the cab driver who they've invited out for drinks, agrees was the signal for him to kiss her. After Ted finishes his story, they drink champagne and toast to the future. Future Ted wraps up the episode by telling us what he's learned about life from this experience, as well as foreshadowing later. Then, he reveals to his kids that this woman, that has been unnamed so far, is their Aunt Robin, and that this is going to be a very long story. So the final act finishes Ted and Robin's story, as well as Lily and Marshall's minor relationship conflict. Ted begins to act in a great position for the second date, with who we now know will become a very good friend of his. But Ted fumbles in the worst way possible, and he does so in a way that characterises a lot of his struggles with his love life, by getting ahead of himself and being easily infatuated. He then makes a speech about how he's fed up with his unsuccessful love life, and how he's ready for marriage, thereby telling the audience directly what he's looking for, his struggles and the sort of relationship to expect with the mother later on. And despite his poor use of words in the apartment, he still manages to get close to a second date anyway, showing that despite his failures, there is still hope. Lily and Marshall's story ends in a very similar way, but it's a lot more successful. After Barney's questioning, which characterises his views on love and relationships, Marshall has his own speech about his relationship. The speech does lead to a far better outcome. He admits that he likes olives and Lily doesn't care. The final scene with 2005 Ted shows us how most stories will end, at the bar drinking with his friends, and then we get a wrap up from 2030 Ted. Most episodes don't include the cab driver, but Ranjit will become a recurring character in the show. The final twist that the love interest is not the mother, and is in fact a final main character that will be included in the gang in the next episode. In this video, I've not discussed how the pilot is great because it's entertaining. Not because it's obvious, or because it doesn't matter, but because, well, that's a different video, and I'm not a comedian. I haven't got a background in comedy. I do have a background in screenwriting, and I am in my last year of a degree in filmmaking, and I like sitcoms. And so this isn't about how I Met Your Mother is a good episode, because that's completely subjective and completely up to whether or not you find it funny. I know it's a good pilot because of what it does as a pilot. How it sets up its world, characters, setting and themes, all while providing a roadmap for future episodes. It's not just that I think the pilot is entertaining, because I like a lot of pilots. The How I Met Your Mother pilot is the best pilot because of how it sets up its show for success. It doesn't just do the world, character, setting and themes. It also sets up how they all interact together, how the characters interact with that setting and world, and how they relate to its themes, and what their thoughts are on those themes. But with that, that's time. Thank you for watching this video. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And my last video also covered How I Met Your Mother in a lot of detail if you want more How I Met Your Mother stuff to watch. I did try to keep the video about the same length as the pilot, but I'm still recording, so I guess you'll know better than I will. I just finished rewatching Adventure Time, and so I think the next video is going to cover post apocalypses. Part of the reason why I covered just one episode of a TV show is because I've been very busy this month, but I've still had to rush. It's taken me 3 weeks to write and record this. Well, yeah, I want to keep it down to 2 weeks to have enough time to edit properly. But I still might have to rush this in the edit, but I don't know. Well, anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again in about a month or so.